Good morning, everyone. This is Group 7. The topic that we are going to present today is topic 13, which is Chapter 23, Plant Evolution and Diversity. The subtopic that we are going to present is 23.1 and 23.2. So I will start the presentation now. Now I'm going to introduce the learning outcomes of the first two subtopics. To compare and contrast algae with land plants, to list the traits that enable plants to adapt to live on land, to evaluate the differences in the alternation of generations of land plants, to list the traits that classify a plant as a bryophyte, to compare the three groups of bryophyte, to identify the key structures and stages in the life cycle of a moss. Firstly, I would like to talk about the ancestry of plants. Plants begin in the water. Scientists believe that plants are evolved from an ancestor of green algae, which is a member of kingdom Protista at 590 million years ago. This is shown through fossil evidence that people have found many years ago. Plants depend on water for living, such as reproduction and other, to avoid themselves from drying out. So, what is the similarities of green algae and terrestrial plant? Firstly, both of them contain chlorophyll A, B, and various accessory pigments. Second, both of them store excess carbohydrates as starch. Third, both of them have cell walls which are composed of cellulose. However, the differences between green algae and terrestrial plants are plants will not only protect zygote, but it will also protect and nourish the embryo. So these are the pictures that shows the embryo of green algae and plants. From the first picture, we can observe that there is no protection around the embryo of green algae. However, in the second picture, we can see that the embryo is protected by the seed coat and nourished by nutrients. Based on the commonality with algae and DNA-RNA-based sequences, it is stated that the group of algae which is most related to plant is charophyte. Although in Chapter 21, we know that Spirogivra is one of the charophytes, but the ancestor of land plant that most related to is charophyte Chara and Coleochaete. Chara are commonly known as stone worms because they are encrusted with calcium carbonate deposit. Their body of a single file of a very long cell is anchored in mud by thin filament. The region that whorls of branches occur is called nodes. It is located between the cell and the main axis. It is a region where the male and female reproductive structures is grown. The next one is coleochaete. In this picture, it appears this light, but the body is actually composed of long branch filament of cell. Plant is classified using molecular and morphological information by plant systematics. Plant is described as non-vascular, seedless vascular, and vascular seed plant. Under non-vascular, we have bryophyte. Under seedless vascular, we have lycophyte, fern, and fern allis. And under vascular seed plant, we have gymnosperm and angiosperm. This picture shows the evolution of plant. Based on what I have said, the ancestor of land plant is charophyte. But after the plant goes on land, the primitive plant to grow is non-vascular plant, which is bryophyte. Bryophyte does not have vascular tissue. They need to grow around moist location so that they would not dry out easily. The next evolution is seedless vascular, which means that the plants start to grow vascular tissue, but they have not yet grown seed for reproduction, so they use spores to reproduce. The last one is seed vascular plant. These plants have grown vascular tissue and seed for their reproduction. This picture shows the key group of plants and their features. You guys can read yourself. Now, there are some questions which I would like to ask. Firstly, why plants move to land? This is because they can obtain more sunlight, more nutrients, and more carbon dioxide for them to grow. However, there is a disadvantage which they might suffer from, which is water loss and drying out. Now, my group member will explain to you guys about what adaptation that can help plants to survive on land. That's all for me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and very good morning. I am Nufali Sakina Wintumba Zambri. So today I will present about adaptation to land, alternation of generation, and dominant generation. What is adaptation to land? Basically, like algae, they are weightless, surrounded by water, and protect from sun. However, all that will change when it moves from water to land. Plants that move from water to land need mechanism to deal with water loss, gravity, and sun exposure. So next, I will mention the features that are evolutionary adaptation of most terrestrial plants. Before we proceed, what is the terrestrial plants? The terrestrial plants means the plants that grow on land. Here are the example of terrestrial plant, which are Hibiscus rosa sinensis, custard apple or Ananas squamosa, and teak or Tectona grandis. So, here is a summary for what we will learn. These are the plants challenged when they grow on land and the traits of plants that enable them to live on land. First, plants that living on land have a limited amount of water available. The bodies composed of tissue have a lower surface area to volume ratio, and then they are also exposed to higher intensities of UV rays. The traits of plants based on the plant silage are leaf have a waterproof cuticle and have stomata on the side of the leaf, and then there are also presence of tracheids. They are also composed of three-dimensional tissues and have a diploid genome. Okay, let's take a look with more details how the traits function on the terrestrial plants. Plants that living on land have a limited amount of water available. As an adaptation to them to live on land, they are protected from desiccation or drying out by a waxy covering that is called cuticle. Cuticle is a waterproof that covers all exposed surface. Cuticle can prevent water loss from the leaf, but the problem that this limit gas exchange for photosynthesis and cellular respiration. However, the solution is leaf have a stomata. Stomata is the tiny openings that mainly found under the side of leaf. These pores allow for gas exchange but can also allow water vapor to escape. Next, moving water within plants is a challenge that increases with plant size. It means that the bigger size of the plants, the bigger challenge to transport water through the plant. Picture the height of moss compared to the height of redwood tree. The different members of the land plants can be distinguished based on the presence or absence of tracheids, which is specialized cells with protein that resist gravity and facilitate the upward transport of water and mineral. As we already knew that in plants have xylem tissue, which transport water and mineral from roots to leaf, and in xylem have these tracheids. In this picture shows that the xylem structure, which has tracheate and vessel element. The tracheate and vessel element support to transport the water and minerals from root to leaf. Next, the plant challenge is composed of tissues have a lower surface area to volume ratio. So, what are the traits that enable plants to adapt to live on land? Compared to green algae, the bodies of land plants are composed of three-dimensional tissue. As we already knew that, a tissue is an association of many cells of the same type that can lead to specialized structures such as organ. So, tissue help to increase ability to avoid water loss on their surface. In this picture shows the three basic types of plant tissue: parenchyma tissue, collenchyma tissue, and sclerenchyma tissue. Plants living on land are exposed to higher intensities of UV rays than are aquatic algae. Exposure to ultraviolet light can increase the chance of mutation. So, the traits of dead plants that enable them to live on land. Based on this challenge, they have a diploid genome that can hide the effect of a single deleterious allele. All terrestrial plants have both diploid and a haploid generation, and the evolutionary shift toward a more dominant diploid generation allows for greater genetic variability in land plants. In this picture, show the structure of a leaf and xylem. On the leaf, have a waxy cuticle that waterproof layer reduce water loss from surface and have a stomata that pores on underside of leaf through which carbon dioxide and water vapor are exchanged. And the xylem transport water and mineral from roots to leaf that contains two types of conducting cell, which is tracheids and basal elements. Next, this is a new subtopic, which is alternation of generation. The figure below shows the life cycle of plants. Next, I will present how the life cycle occurs. Okay, in plant life cycle, there are has a diploid and haploid stage. Both contain multicellular structure. Unlike in the life cycle of humans, that the diploid stage is multicellular and the haploid stage is composed of single cell gametes. So, diploid, spore will produce sporophyte generation, and haploid, gamete, will produce gametophyte. From the beginning, the sporophyte produces a specialized structure called sporangum, and then meiosis will take place to produce haploid spores. After that, the spores will undergo mitosis and become a new multicellular gametophyte. For the information, spores is a reproductive cell which can develop into a new organism without the need to fuse unlike the gametophyte. In this picture, we can see clearly what is sporophyte. In sporophyte have settle, sporangum, and food, while in gametophyte has a rhizoid. Next, I will present about gametophyte. What is gametophyte? Gametophyte is a multicellular haploid structure that will develop into male and female gamete in the producing regions called gametanglia. Male gametanglia called enteroidea that produce sperm, and female gametanglia is called archegonia that produce eggs. And then, like human life cycle, the sperm and the eggs will fuse and become a zygote. After that, they begin the diploid part of the life cycle. What is dominant generation? Dominant generation is the generation that occupies the largest portion of the life cycle. Land plants differ as to which generation is dominant. For the example, moss, the gametophyte is dominant, while fern, pine trees, and peach trees, the sporophyte is dominant. In the history of land plants, vascular system evolved only in the sporophytes. Notice that sporophyte dominates, and then the gametophytes become microscopic. And lastly, the gametophytes depends on the sporophytes. In this picture show that the example of the land plants with their dominant generation. The
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. I am Muhammad Arif Shazwan and I'll be talking about evolution of bryophytes, the first plants that colonize land. So, what is bryophytes? They consist of liverworts, hornworts, and mosses. Bryophytes were the first plants to colonize land. They only superficially appear to have roots, stems, and leaves because, by definition, true roots, stems, and leaves must contain vascular tissue. Because they lack of vascular tissue, they are often called non-vascular plants. They also typically are low-lying, like in the picture. They do not form a monophyletic group. An incomplete fossil record makes it difficult to tell how closely related the various bryophytes are. Bryophytes' bodies are usually covered by cuticle, but it is interrupted in hornworts and mosses by stomata. They also have apical tissues that produces complex tissues. Bryophytes are the only land plants in which the gametophyte is dominant. The bryophytes' lack of vascular tissue and the presence of flagellated sperm means that you can find them in most moist locations, but some bryophytes are well in harsh environment as well because they can reproduce asexually. For example, Marchantia is the best known species of thelloid liverwort. It can usually be found on damp soil after a fire, as it can reproduce asexually and sexually. Bryophytes also have benefits to the world. They can convert mountain to soils as they can hold a lot of moisture. They also prevent desiccation and make beautiful forests that we see now. That is why bryophytes are important to the world. Type of bryophytes, liverworts. They are divided into two groups, thallus liverworts and leafy liverworts. Thallus liverworts have flattened bodies and known as thallus. Both of them are superficially resemble mosses. But liverwort starts with a liver. Why? This is because the lobes in the thallus resembles lobe of a liver, like in the picture. But majority of liverworts are leafy types. I'll be talking about liverworts that comes from genus Mercantia. They have thin thallus and have numerous hair-like extensions called rhizoids. They function as a root for the thallus. On the upper surface of the thallus contains gamma cup. In the gamma cup have gamma. The sexual reproduction depends on the disc-headed that bear antheridia and the umbrella-headed that contains archegonia. Following the fertilization, tiny spirophytes composed of a root, a short stalk, and a capsule begin growing within the archegonia. In here. Then, the wind will blow the spores that are produced within the capsules to another place. That's how they reproduce. That's all from me. Thank you. This chapter will be continued by my group member.
Assalamualaikum and very good evening. So I am Nur Irdina binti Muhammad Badrul. Will continue my group presentation with the subtopic of hornworts and mosses. So these three, which are liverworts, hornworts and mosses, are the groups of bryophyte. But the first group, which is liverwort, have been covered by Shazwan, and now we will only be discussed about hornworts and mosses. So this is the second group of bryophyte, which is hornworts. So hornworts usually live in moist or well-shaded areas, but some of them live on trees. Hornworts reproducing asexually through fragmentation to bypass the alternation of its generation. So the picture below is the picture of hornworts, and as we can see from the picture, gametophyte usually grows as a thin rosette or ribbon-like thallus between 1 and 5 cm in its diameter. So gametophyte can photosynthesis, and we should know that not every organism are able to fix atmospheric nitrogen, but among the organisms that can do so are the cyanobacteria. So from the slide, we can see that gametophyte have a symbiotic relationship with cyanobacteria, thus it can fix nitrogen from the air. So we can see small sporophytes from the picture below. So sporophytes usually resemble as a tiny green broom handles rising from a thin gametophyte, and their diameter is usually less than 2 cm. So sporophytes can also photosynthesis, although it only has one chloroplast per cell. The third group of bryophyte, which is mosses. Mosses are the largest group of non-vascular plants with over 15,000 species. Most of mosses prefer in damp and shaded locations, but some of them even survive in deserts, meanwhile others inhabit bogs and streams. So we should note that mosses have a really powerful abilities. So from the picture, we can see that in forests, they frequently form a mat that covers the ground and rotting logs. But when it comes to dry environments, they may look completely dead as they become shriveled and turn into brown in color. But as soon as it rains, these plants will become green and continue to resume their metabolic activity. So, there are three types of mosses, which are granite mosses, peat mosses, and true mosses. Next, the importance of peat moss, which is in the genus of Sphagnum, in commercial and ecological to the humans. So this is the picture of peat moss. So peat moss usually used in gardening because The cell walls of pig moss have a great ability to absorb the water. So due to its great ability, it helps to improve the water holding capacity of the soil. Note that 1% of the Earth's surface is peatlands, where that sphagnum accumulates, but it does not decay. Enjoy the
The
video!
predominant state of the life cycle of a moss is the gametophyte, which consists of two stages. Number 1, protonema, and number 2, leafy stage. They attach to the soil through multicellular and branched rhizoids. This stage bears the sex organs. The sex organs are multicellular. The male sex organ is called antheridium. The female sex organ, called archegonium, is flask-shaped and produces a single egg. The antherozoids are released into the water where they come in contact with archegonium. The antherozoid fuses with the egg to produce the zygote. Zygotes do not undergo reduction division immediately. They produce a multicellular body called sporophyte. The sporophyte is not free-living but is attached to the photosynthetic gametophyte and derives nourishment from it. Some cells of the sporophyte undergo reduction division or meiosis to produce haploid spores. These spores germinate to produce gametophyte.
So the previous video already explained about the life cycle of a typical temperate zone moss. So to conclude, firstly, the gametophyte of mosses begins as an algalite. Then it becomes a branching filament of cells called the protonema. So the second box in this slide explains about the protonema. Protonema precedes and produces upright leafy shoots that sprout rhizoids. So note that the leafy shoot can be either antheridia or archegonia, which antheridia is a male sex organ and archegonia is a female sex organ. So after the fertilization process occurs, the zygote and developing sporophyte are retained within the archegonium. So the fourth and the fifth box in this slide explain about the sporophyte. So a moss sporophyte is always attached to the gametophyte, and at first the sporophyte is green and photosynthetic, but once it matures, it is brown in color and non-photosynthetic. So next is the mature sporophyte. So a mature sporophyte usually has its food buried in female gametophyte tissue. It has a stalk and it has an upper capsule called the sporangium. So the sporangium can produce a lot of spores, as many as 50 million spores, and the spores are released when they are most likely to be dispersed in the air current. So that's all from me and my group, Group 7. Thank you.